What would you do if you faced an unexpected challenge? Imagine walking down the street when suddenly a stranger confronts you with aggression. How would you respond? Would you stand your ground or walk away? In today's video, we're diving into a shocking encounter that unfolded in broad daylight, a situation that turned from confrontation to a surprising twist. You'll witness a story that raises crucial questions about courage, resilience, and standing up against hate. But why should you stick around until the end? Because this isn't just about one woman fighting back. It's a powerful reminder of the strength that lies within all of us. You'll discover lesser-known facts about resilience in the face of adversity and the impact of societal attitudes toward race and conflict. You'll learn about asterisk, the surprising ways people react under pressure. Asterisk, the importance of self-defense and knowing your worth. Asterisk, real-life implications of standing against racism. Asterisk, how bystanders can play a role in confronting injustice. So what happens when a racist act sparks an unexpected response? How does one moment change the course of a day or even a life? In the following story, we'll unravel the events that led to a shocking confrontation between a white man and a black woman. This isn't just a tale of violence. It's about empowerment and the ability to fight back when faced with hatred. As we explore this incident, keep in mind that the lessons learned here resonate far beyond the moment itself. Stay tuned as we peel back the layers of this incident. We'll not only recount what happened, but also reflect on the broader implications for our society. Remember, every moment is a chance to choose courage over fear. As we delve into this story, think about how you would act in a similar situation. What kind of strength would you need to summon? Prepare for a journey that challenges perceptions and ignites discussions. Let's dive in and explore the powerful story. It was a sunny afternoon in the city, and the streets were alive with activity. People hurried by, lost in their own worlds, each person carrying their unique story. The sounds of laughter mixed with the distant honking of car horns and the chatter of friends catching up over coffee. Street vendors called out to passersby, their colorful stalls brimming with fresh fruits, handmade crafts, and enticing snacks. In the heart of this vibrant scene stood Sarah, a young black woman in her late 20s. She was on her way home from a long day at work, her mind racing with thoughts about deadlines and meetings. Wearing a simple black dress and comfortable sneakers, she blended into the bustling crowd. Her day had been exhausting, but the warm sun on her face and the aroma of street food lifted her spirits. As Sarah walked, she noticed a group of people gathered near a food truck, sharing stories and laughing. She smiled at the sight, grateful for the community that made this city feel like home. Little did she know that her peaceful afternoon was about to take a dramatic turn. In stark contrast to Sarah's light demeanor was Tom, a white man in his mid-30s, standing a few feet away. He was tall and burly, with a scruffy beard and tattoos peeking out from under his shirt sleeves. Tom had a reputation for being loud and abrasive, and today he seemed to be in particularly bad spirits. As he paced back and forth, his anger simmered just beneath the surface. Tom had a history of making crude remarks and stirring up trouble, often fueled by a sense of superiority. His eyes darted around the street, and as he watched the happy group near the food truck, something in him snapped. It was as if he couldn't tolerate the joy of others, especially when it was accompanied by diversity. He felt a surge of entitlement that led him to believe he could speak over everyone else, to control the atmosphere around him. As Sarah continued her walk, she could hear snippets of Tom's voice rising above the cheerful chatter. His words dripped with disdain as he made racist comments, targeting the people enjoying their time together. At first, she tried to ignore him, focusing instead on the beauty of the day and the music playing in the distance. But the atmosphere shifted. Tom's voice grew louder, his anger palpable, and the light-hearted banter of those nearby turned to murmurs of discomfort. Suddenly, Tom's gaze landed on Sarah. To him, she represented everything he resented. A confident, successful woman who dared to exist in his space. His face twisted into a sneer as he began to approach her, his intentions clear. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine, a sense of foreboding creeping in. She had encountered rude people before, but something about Tom's demeanor felt particularly menacing. "Look at you, thinking you can just walk around here," Tom shouted, stepping closer. The bustling street seemed to fall silent, as if time had slowed. Sarah's heart raced as she realized the attention was now on her. She stood tall, unwilling to back down, yet her mind raced with thoughts of how this encounter could escalate. "What's your problem?" she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just walking home." But Tom wasn't interested in conversation. He had decided to pick a fight, and Sarah was his target. "You don't belong here," he spat, his words laced with venom. The crowd began to murmur, unsure of how to react. Some people pulled out their phones, ready to capture the unfolding drama, while others stepped back, instinctively distancing themselves from the tension. In an instant, Tom lunged at her, his hand swinging through the air. Sarah barely had time to react before she felt the force of his fist connect with her arm. Shock and pain coursed through her, but instead of crumbling, she felt a spark of anger ignite within her. The crowd gasped, and a few voices shouted in disbelief, urging him to stop. Tom, taken aback by her strength, momentarily froze. He hadn't expected her to fight back. In his mind, he had imagined her cowering, defeated by his aggression. But Sarah refused to be a victim. She quickly regained her composure and faced him with fierce determination. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Sarah shouted, her voice ringing with authority. She felt a rush of adrenaline, fueled by the support of those around her. The crowd began to rally behind her, their eyes wide with a mix of shock and admiration. It was as if a switch had flipped. The onlookers were no longer passive witnesses, but participants in a stand against hatred. Tom, realizing he had miscalculated, took a step back. His bravado faltered as he looked around and saw the faces of those he had tried to intimidate. The fear he had tried to instill was now reflected back at him. The cheers for Sarah grew louder, empowering her further. The confrontation escalated as Tom found himself on the defensive. With each word Sarah spoke, she dismantled his aggressive facade. "You think you can hit me and get away with it? Not today," she declared, her voice unwavering. The tension in the air thickened, and the crowd leaned in closer, hanging on every word. Sarah's heart raced as she spoke, but she drew strength from the eyes of her supporters. She knew she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had faced discrimination and hatred. Her stance became more than just self-defense. It was a powerful declaration against injustice. As the confrontation unfolded, the unexpected happened. A woman from the crowd stepped forward, her face set in determination. "You need to back off," she shouted at Tom, joining Sarah in the fight. The sight of this unexpected ally emboldened Sarah even more, transforming the scene from a one-on-one battle into a united front against aggression. Tom, realizing the tides were turning against him, glanced nervously at the gathering crowd. The odds were no longer in his favor, and the support for Sarah grew stronger. With every passing moment, Tom's bravado crumbled. The cheers for Sarah became a wave of empowerment, drowning out his angry outbursts. Just as it seemed Tom might retreat, he yelled one last insult, desperately grasping for control. "You think you're tough? You're nothing." His voice cracked with anger and fear, revealing the vulnerability beneath his aggression. But Sarah's resolve only deepened. "No," she replied firmly. "I am everything you're not. I am strong, I am brave, and I will not be silenced." With that, she stepped closer to him, her eyes blazing with defiance. The crowd erupted in cheers, and the atmosphere shifted from one of tension to exhilaration. Sarah's spirit, once a flicker, now burned brightly, illuminating the darkness that Tom had tried to cast over them. The moment was electric, and everyone felt the shift. It was a collective awakening, a reminder that courage can be found even in the most unexpected places. As the crowd surrounded them, the air was thick with tension. Sarah felt her heart racing, each beat echoing in her ears like a war drum. She was no longer just a woman walking home. She was a symbol of resilience, a beacon for those who had faced cruelty. Tom stood before her, his face a mask of rage, but she could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He had expected fear, but he was met with defiance. "Why don't you just walk away?" he sneered, trying to regain control of the situation. But Sarah knew that walking away wasn't an option. Not now. The moment had become larger than her. It represented a fight against racism and hatred that had plagued society for too long. Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts and steeling her resolve. She recalled the countless stories she had heard about people standing up against injustice, about those who had fought back when the odds seemed impossible. Each story fueled her determination. In that pivotal moment, she decided she would not back down. She would stand her ground. The crowd began to murmur in encouragement, their eyes filled with hope. "Fight back," someone shouted. "Don't let him intimidate you." The words washed over Sarah, emboldening her further. She could feel the energy of the crowd pushing her forward, giving her the strength she needed to confront Tom. In an unexpected move, Sarah raised her hands, palms facing outward. "You think you can push people around," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "You think violence makes you powerful. Look at yourself." Tom's anger flared, and with a quick motion, he lunged forward again, trying to strike her. But this time, Sarah was ready. As his fist swung toward her, she instinctively stepped to the side, avoiding the blow with agility she didn't know she possessed. In that moment, Sarah felt alive. The adrenaline coursed through her veins, heightening her senses and sharpening her focus. She could hear the crowd gasping, their disbelief mingling with shouts of encouragement. Realizing that she had dodged his attack, Sarah seized the opportunity. She stepped forward and pushed Tom back, using all her strength to create distance between them. The move surprised him, and for a brief moment, she saw his confidence falter. This was her chance to turn the tables. "Do you really think you can scare me?" Sarah shouted, her voice ringing out over the murmurs of the crowd. "You picked the wrong person to mess with." Her words hung in the air, and the crowd erupted in cheers. The energy shifted. Tom was no longer the dominant force. Instead, he was becoming the cornered animal, angry and desperate. As Tom stumbled back, Sarah moved with purpose. She felt the strength of those around her, the weight of their collective support giving her courage. In this chaotic dance, she was no longer just fighting Tom. She was fighting for every person who had felt small and powerless in the face of aggression. Tom lunged again, his movements fueled by anger, but Sarah sidestepped him effortlessly. She could feel the rhythm of the confrontation, like a dance where she controlled the tempo. With each dodge and step, she began to gain confidence. The spectators watched in awe as she transformed from a target into a fierce opponent. With every feint and counter, she displayed a resilience that was mesmerizing. Sarah had studied self-defense in the past, but today was different. This wasn't a class. It was a real fight for dignity and respect. She could feel her muscles tense and relax, her body responding instinctively to each moment. The crowd around them grew louder, their shouts ringing out like a battle cry. "You got this," someone yelled. "Show him what you're made of." Each cheer fueled her fire, and she began to feel invincible. With every movement, she embodied the spirit of those who had faced adversity and refused to be silenced. As the fight continued, Sarah took a step back, analyzing Tom's next move. He was breathing heavily, his rage giving way to exhaustion. It was a crucial moment. She could see the weariness etched on his face. The fear in his eyes told her that he was beginning to realize he had underestimated her. With renewed determination, Sarah decided it was time to take control. She had been defensive long enough. She was ready to fight back in a way that would leave a mark, not just on Tom, but on everyone witnessing this confrontation. She feigned to the left, drawing Tom in, and as he lunged, she pivoted on her heel. In one fluid motion, She struck his side with her elbow, using her body weight to amplify the impact. The blow sent him reeling, and the crowd gasped in unison. This was the turning point. The tide had shifted dramatically in her favor. In that split second, Sarah felt a wave of clarity wash over her. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been a target of hate. With every strike, she was challenging the systemic racism that often went unchallenged. She was reclaiming her power and standing up for all the voices that had been silenced. Tom, now visibly shaken, tried to regain his footing, but Sarah didn't let up. She followed up with a swift kick aimed at his knee, a move she had practiced countless times. The impact made him stumble, and the crowd erupted in cheers, their energy pushing her further. "Yes, you can do it," they shouted, their encouragement filling the air with a sense of solidarity. But in the midst of this physical confrontation, there was a deeper battle unfolding. Sarah was not only fighting Tom, she was also fighting against the ingrained prejudices that had allowed such behavior to flourish. She understood that her actions today could resonate far beyond this moment, sparking conversations about racism and the importance of standing up for oneself. As Tom fought to regain his composure, Sarah's determination only grew. She had a purpose now. The more she fought, the more she felt a connection to everyone who had faced similar struggles. This fight was a declaration that hatred would not win. She was not just defending herself. She was defending a legacy of resilience. In the final moments of the confrontation, Sarah knew she had to deliver a decisive blow, not just physically, but metaphorically. She took a deep breath, centered herself, and prepared for the culmination of this unexpected battle. Tom, sensing that he was losing control, charged at her once more, a desperate attempt to reassert his dominance. But Sarah was ready. She stepped to the side and delivered a powerful knee strike to his midsection. The impact resonated through the air, and Tom doubled over, gasping for breath. The crowd roared with approval, their cheers echoing through the street. Sarah stood tall, her chest rising and falling with exhilaration. She had fought back against aggression and hatred, proving that fear could be overcome with courage and strength. As Tom struggled to regain his composure, the crowd began to surround him, a barrier of support for Sarah. She could hear their voices rising in unison, celebrating her victory. But even in that moment of triumph, she knew this was just the beginning. The fight for respect and dignity extended beyond this incident. It was part of a larger struggle. Tom, still on the ground, looked up at her with a mix of confusion and disbelief. The power dynamic had shifted. The man who thought he could bully others was now vulnerable. Sarah locked eyes with him, and in that moment, she felt a sense of closure. She had faced her fear and come out stronger on the other side. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah knew she had a message to share. This wasn't just about one woman fighting back. It was about a collective stand against racism. She realized the importance of speaking out and encouraging others to do the same. In a world where hatred often went unchecked, her actions could inspire others to find their voice. With the support of her newfound allies, Sarah took a step forward, addressing the crowd. "This is not just my victory. It's ours. We all have the right to stand up against hate. We will not be silenced, and we will not back down." The cheers erupted again, filling the air with a sense of unity. In that moment, Sarah felt a profound connection to everyone around her. Together, they were creating a ripple effect, challenging the status quo and redefining what it meant to be resilient in the face of adversity. As the dust began to settle from the confrontation, an unusual stillness enveloped the area. The crowd that had gathered was a mix of disbelief and awe. They watched as Sarah stood tall, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, her heart pounding in her chest. The confrontation had been intense, but what came next would be just as crucial. In that moment of silence, Sarah could hear her breath, quick and shallow. She looked around, noticing the faces of those who had cheered her on. There was a sense of unity among them, a shared experience that transcended the immediate chaos. They were all witnesses to something powerful. The fight was not just hers. It was a reflection of a larger struggle against racism and injustice. Meanwhile, Tom was struggling to get back to his feet, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He had underestimated Sarah, and now he was grappling with the reality of his actions. The crowd that had once seemed to support him was now an unyielding force against him. "Get out of here," someone shouted, their voice cutting through the tension. The crowd began to close in on Tom, their displeasure palpable. They had seen the way he had acted, the way he had tried to assert his dominance. It was time for him to face the consequences. Tom's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. He was met with cold stares and pointed fingers, a stark contrast to the feeling of power he had had just moments ago. He realized he was no longer the predator. He was the prey, hunted by the very people he thought would support him. As Tom retreated, Sarah took a moment to gather her thoughts. The adrenaline was still pumping, but she knew she had to keep her wits about her. The confrontation was over, but the implications of what had just happened loomed large. She had fought back, yes, but what would this mean for her going forward? "Did I really do that?" she whispered to herself, still in disbelief about her own actions. She had stood her ground, and in doing so, she had not only defended herself, but also made a statement. This was about more than just one incident. It was a declaration against the hate that had pervaded her life and the lives of countless others. The crowd began to murmur, breaking the silence. People were sharing their thoughts, their excitement palpable. "Did you see that? She really stood up to him," someone exclaimed. Others nodded in agreement, their voices rising in a chorus of support. But with the cheers came the weight of responsibility. Sarah was aware that this incident wouldn't just fade away. It was a moment that could inspire others to speak out, but it could also attract attention from those who opposed such defiance. She knew there would be questions about her actions, her motivations, and what this meant for her future. Suddenly, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning around, she was met by a woman in her 30s, her eyes filled with empathy. "You were amazing," the woman said softly. "But be careful. There are people who won't take kindly to this." Sarah nodded, feeling the truth of those words sink in. She had acted bravely, but bravery came with risks. The fight against racism was not just physical, it was also a battle of ideals and beliefs. Those who held on to their prejudices might lash out, trying to silence voices like hers. As Sarah began to walk away from the scene, she heard the unmistakable sound of sirens approaching in the distance. It was a stark reminder that the world outside of this confrontation was still very much alive. News crews would soon arrive, eager to capture the narrative of the day. Would they frame her as a hero, or would they twist the story to fit their own agenda? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She had fought for herself, but now her story would be told by others. Sarah knew that the media had a way of sensationalizing events, often missing the deeper truths. She hoped they would honor the message of resilience and strength she had tried to convey. As the police arrived, they began to sort through the chaos, interviewing witnesses and assessing the situation. Sarah stood to the side, feeling a mix of apprehension and pride. She had just stood up to an aggressor, yet here she was, a potential subject of scrutiny. Amidst the swirling emotions, Sarah felt a presence beside her. It was a young man who had been part of the crowd, his eyes filled with admiration. "What you did back there was incredible," he said. "I've never seen someone stand up like that. You inspired me." His words washed over her like a warm wave. "Thank you," she replied, feeling her heart swell. "I just couldn't let him get away with it." "Exactly," he exclaimed. "We need more people like you to stand up and speak out. This isn't just about one incident. It's about changing how we respond to hate." Sarah felt a sense of connection with him. In that moment, she realized that her fight could spark a conversation, a ripple effect that might encourage others to confront their own fears. They discussed their thoughts on the incident, sharing stories of moments when they had faced prejudice or witnessed injustice. As the police began to disperse the crowd, Sarah took a deep breath. The moment was fleeting, but the significance was profound. She turned to the young man, saying, "We can't let this be just a one-time thing. We need to keep this conversation going, educate people about racism, and encourage others to stand up." He nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. Let's organize a meeting or a community gathering. We can bring people together to discuss these issues. If we want change, we have to start somewhere." Their discussion continued, fueled by a shared passion for social justice. Sarah could feel the embers of change igniting, a fire that could spread through their community. She envisioned a place where stories like hers could inspire action, where people could gather to support one another and confront the systemic issues that plagued their society. As the evening approached, news of the incident began to circulate on social media. Videos of Sarah's confrontation went viral, sparking discussions across various platforms. People from all walks of life began to share their own experiences with racism, creating a chorus of voices demanding change. Sarah found herself scrolling through the comments, her heart racing. Some praised her courage, while others questioned her actions. Why did she escalate it? Some asked, while others declared her a hero. The online discourse reflected the complexity of the issue at hand, but she felt grateful that it was being discussed openly. Her phone buzzed with notifications, each ping a reminder that her actions had resonated with many. A friend from college reached out, expressing pride in her bravery. Others shared stories of their own encounters with prejudice, creating a sense of solidarity. It was powerful to see how her story was becoming part of a larger narrative, a movement toward justice. However, with the attention came the inevitable backlash. A small group of individuals began to criticize Sarah online, labeling her as an instigator and claiming she had brought the violence upon herself. She should have just walked away, they said, dismissing her experience and the broader implications of her confrontation. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she read these comments. It was disheartening to see how quickly people could vilify her without understanding the context. She had fought back not just for herself, but for every person who had been marginalized and bullied. Despite the negativity, Sarah found strength in the support she received from friends and family. They rallied around her, emphasizing the importance of standing up for what is right, even in the face of criticism. "Don't let them silence you," her sister said during a phone call. "You're a voice for so many. Keep speaking out." In the following days, the local community organized a rally to stand in solidarity with Sarah and to address the issues of racism and injustice. Flyers were posted around town, inviting everyone to come together to discuss their experiences and share their stories. The message was clear. They would not allow hate to win. On the day of the rally, Sarah arrived at the park where it was being held. The atmosphere was electric, filled with people holding signs that read "Love over hate" and "Stand together." She felt a rush of emotions as she looked around, realizing she was not alone in her fight. As the speeches began, Sarah took a moment to collect her thoughts. She was nervous about speaking in front of the crowd, but she knew she had to share her story. This was her chance to amplify the message that had sparked so many conversations in recent days. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah stepped up to the microphone, her heart racing. She looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some strangers, all united in a common cause. Taking a deep breath, she began. "Thank you all for being here today. What happened to me wasn't just about one encounter. It's about standing up against a cycle of hate that too many people experience daily." Her voice was steady as she recounted the events of that day. She spoke about the fear, the adrenaline, and ultimately, the triumph of standing up for herself. The aftermath of the confrontation continued to reverberate throughout the community, a powerful wave of change beginning to wash over the landscape of social consciousness. Sarah had become an unintentional leader, her actions igniting a passion for justice that many had long suppressed. The rally had been just the beginning, a spark that lit the fire of activism in the hearts of those who had witnessed or heard about the incident. As news outlets picked up the story, the narrative expanded beyond the borders of their small town. Headlines captured the moment. Brave woman fights back against racism. Community rallies behind victim of assault. Sarah's story was no longer just hers. It was now a part of a larger conversation about race, justice, and the fight against oppression. On social media, posts about Sarah's bravery began to trend. Videos of her confrontation and the subsequent rally were shared thousands of times, sparking discussions that ranged from praise to critical examination. People across the nation started sharing their experiences with racism and discrimination, revealing stories that were often hushed in public spaces. Hashtags like #StandWithSarah and #FightBackAgainstHate began to circulate. These tags not only highlighted Sarah's story but also provided a platform for countless others to share their narratives. Each post added fuel to the fire, creating an interconnected network of voices demanding change. Sarah found herself drawn into this whirlwind of digital activism. With each notification, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The world was watching her, and she knew that her actions were part of a much larger movement. This was a chance to bring awareness to the struggles faced by so many. In the weeks following the confrontation, community meetings sprang up in various locations. Local organizations, churches, and schools began hosting discussions about racism, bias, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Sarah was often invited to share her story, her experiences resonating with many who attended. During one particular meeting at the local community center, the room was packed. People filled the chairs, and many stood against the walls, eager to hear what Sarah had to say. The energy in the room was palpable, a blend of anticipation and urgency. As she spoke about the incident, her voice trembled slightly, but the strength behind her words was undeniable. "We can't just talk about these issues. We have to act," she urged. "It's not enough to just be against racism. We have to stand up when we see it happening." Her words sparked a conversation among attendees. Questions flew back and forth. How do we educate our children about racism? What can we do in our daily lives to combat prejudice? How can we support those who feel marginalized? Sarah listened intently, heartened by the determination in the room. This wasn't just a discussion, it was a call to action. People were ready to confront the uncomfortable truths that had long lingered beneath the surface. As Sarah continued to engage with the community, she found herself forming unexpected alliances. Local leaders, activists, and even some law enforcement officers reached out to her, eager to collaborate on initiatives aimed at addressing racial inequality. One evening, Sarah attended a meeting organized by a coalition of local leaders. They discussed ways to create educational programs that addressed racism in schools, focusing on how to teach children about diversity and empathy. Sarah listened as they brainstormed ideas for workshops, community events, and resources that could help foster understanding among different groups. "It's important that we start young," a teacher emphasized. "If we can teach our children to value differences and stand up against hate, we can change the narrative for future generations." Sarah felt a sense of hope swell within her. The collective effort of so many individuals was beginning to take shape. They were no longer just voices in the dark. They were a united front, ready to tackle the issues head-on. As the months passed, Sarah became more involved in local activism. She attended protests, organized events, and collaborated with community leaders to push for changes within the system. The movement she had unwittingly ignited was gaining momentum, spreading like wildfire. At one rally, Sarah stood before a crowd of supporters, her heart racing with excitement. She was surrounded by people from all walks of life, each holding signs and chanting slogans that called for justice and equality. "This is what solidarity looks like," she shouted into the microphone, and the crowd erupted in cheers. The media continued to follow her story, portraying her as a symbol of resilience. Articles highlighted her journey, sharing the impact she had made on her community. But Sarah remained grounded, knowing that the fight was far from over. As Sarah's influence grew, so did the attention from national organizations. Activists from larger cities reached out, asking her to share her experiences at conferences and panels. It was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Suddenly, her story was being discussed in rooms where policies were made, where decisions affecting countless lives were being debated. During one national conference, Sarah found herself standing on a stage, looking out at an audience filled with passionate activists, policymakers, and community leaders. Her palms were sweaty, but the determination in her heart pushed her forward. "I'm just a regular person who decided to fight back," she began, her voice steady. "But if I can inspire even one person to stand up against injustice, then my fight is worth it." As she shared her journey, the audience hung on her every word. The applause that followed was thunderous, a testament to the power of her story. She felt a sense of responsibility wash over her. Her words could spark change beyond her wildest dreams. With her newfound platform, Sarah began to advocate for policy changes in her community. She met with local representatives, presenting them with data and stories from her community that highlighted the urgent need for reforms. "We need better training for law enforcement on racial sensitivity," she urged. "We need programs that support victims of hate crimes." Her passionate pleas began to resonate with some officials, and slowly but surely, conversations about implementing new policies started to take shape. It was a slow process, often met with resistance, but Sarah refused to back down. She knew that change was possible if they persisted. One evening, after a long meeting with local leaders, Sarah left feeling invigorated. They had discussed the potential for creating a task force aimed at addressing hate crimes and building bridges between different community groups. She could see the potential for real change, and it fueled her determination to keep pushing forward. However, the journey was not without its challenges. As Sarah became a prominent figure in the movement, she faced criticism from those who disagreed with her approach. Online trolls emerged, attacking her character and attempting to diminish her message. "She's just trying to get attention," some claimed, while others dismissed her fight as unnecessary. At first, the negativity stung. It was disheartening to see people dismiss her efforts without understanding the complexities of racism and injustice. But Sarah found solace in her supporters. They reminded her that change often comes with resistance, and she couldn't let the negativity overshadow the progress being made. Instead of retreating, Sarah doubled down on her activism. She used the criticism as fuel, reminding herself that every great movement faced opposition. "If they're talking about me, it means we're making waves," she told herself, and that thought empowered her to keep pushing forward. As Sarah's journey continued, she began to notice a shift among the younger generation. Students in local schools started forming their own clubs focused on promoting diversity and inclusion. They organized events that celebrated different cultures, fostering an environment of understanding and acceptance. At one school event, Sarah was invited to speak to a group of high school students. As she stood before them, she could see the eagerness in their eyes. "You have the power to make a difference," she encouraged them. "Don't be afraid to speak up when you see something wrong. Your voice matters." The students responded with enthusiasm, asking questions and sharing their thoughts. Sarah felt a wave of hope wash over her. This was the future she had fought for, a generation ready to confront prejudice and injustice with courage and compassion. As Sarah's influence grew, she began to reflect on the legacy she wanted to leave behind. She didn't want her story to be just another anecdote in the fight against racism. She wanted it to inspire action. Together with other activists, she began working on a mentorship program aimed at guiding young people who wanted to become advocates for social justice. They organized workshops, provided resources, and created safe spaces for discussions about race and inequality. "We are building a movement," Sarah said during one meeting. "And it starts with empowering the next generation. They need to know they are not alone in this fight." As the program gained traction, Sarah watched with pride as young activists began to emerge. They organized their own events, creating a network of support that extended beyond their community. It was a beautiful sight to witness, an entire generation committed to change, armed with knowledge and passion. The fight against racism is never truly over. But Sarah found solace in knowing that she was part of something bigger than herself. Each step forward, no matter how small, was a victory in its own right. Every time she spoke out, every event she organized, and every young activist she mentored added to the momentum. The broader impact of her confrontation was more than just a. It was a sunny afternoon when Sarah decided to take a stroll to the park. The vibrant colors of spring were all around her, flowers blooming, trees budding, and children laughing. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect day, tension brewed, waiting for the right moment to erupt. Sarah had no idea that the normalcy of her afternoon would soon shatter, marking her life forever. As she walked along the path, her mind wandered to her family and friends. She thought about her mother, who had always taught her to be strong in the face of adversity. "You have to stand up for yourself, Sarah," her mother would say, "even when it's hard." Those words echoed in her mind, and little did she know how crucial they would become in a matter of moments. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a figure approached her. It was a white man, his demeanor aggressive and intimidating. As he walked closer, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She could sense the hostility emanating from him like heat from a fire. "Why don't you go back where you came from?" He spat, his voice dripping with disdain. The word hung in the air, heavy with the weight of history and prejudice. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Sarah's heart raced as she processed the situation. What happened next felt surreal. Instead of recoiling in fear, a fire ignited within Sarah. Perhaps it was the strength of her mother's words, or maybe it was a fierce determination to not be silenced. She didn't back down. Instead, she stood her ground. "How dare you speak to me like that?" she shouted, her voice steady despite the tremor of adrenaline coursing through her veins. The man's eyes widened in shock, as if he couldn't believe that a black woman would dare to challenge him. The audacity of her response was almost too much for him to handle. It was a tense standoff, the kind you see in movies, but this was real life, and Sarah felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "Who do you think you are?" he sneered, stepping closer. The space between them felt electric, charged with the potential for violence. Sarah could feel the adrenaline pumping in her veins, her heart racing like a wild drumbeat. She had never been in a situation like this before, but instinct kicked in, urging her to stand tall and defy the hatred directed at her. In that instant, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. What if she made things worse? But as she looked into the man's eyes, she saw a mixture of rage and confusion. It was a moment that could go either way, and she felt as if the world was watching. This was more than just a personal confrontation. It was a fight against centuries of oppression. Before she knew it, a small crowd began to gather around them. People paused in their tracks, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. Some were horrified, others were intrigued, but they all seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Sarah's heart swelled with a mixture of fear and hope. Among the onlookers was an elderly woman named Miss Clara. She had lived in the neighborhood for decades and had seen her fair share of injustice. The sight of Sarah standing up to the man stirred something deep within her. "You go, girl," she shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "Don't let him intimidate you." Those words echoed in Sarah's ears, giving her an extra boost of courage. The man turned to face the crowd, realizing that he was no longer just confronting one woman. He was surrounded by witnesses. Anger and embarrassment flashed across his face, but instead of retreating, he doubled down, his voice rising. "What are you all looking at?" he yelled, attempting to reassert his power. The crowd remained silent, their presence alone a statement of solidarity. It was clear they stood with Sarah, and that made all the difference. In a sudden surge of defiance, Sarah shouted, "You don't scare me." With that, she took a step forward, her body tense but ready. It was a bold move, one that surprised even her. In that moment, something shifted. The fear that had once gripped her was replaced by an exhilarating sense of power. The man seemed taken aback by her sudden boldness, but he quickly regained his composure. You think you can fight back?" He sneered, his fists clenching in anger. "I'll show you what real power looks like." Sarah could feel the tension escalating. It was no longer just a verbal confrontation. It was becoming a physical one. The crowd watched with bated breath, the air thick with anticipation. Sarah could sense their eyes on her, the weight of their expectations resting on her shoulders. Would she really stand her ground? In that split second, as adrenaline surged through her, Sarah made her choice. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her actions. With a swift motion, she moved to the side, dodging his advance and striking back with a quick jab to his shoulder. The move took him by surprise, causing him to stagger back. Gasps erupted from the crowd as they witnessed the unexpected turn of events. Sarah could feel a mixture of exhilaration and disbelief. She had actually fought back. But the fight was far from over. The man quickly regained his balance and rushed at her again, his anger transforming into sheer rage. "You're going to regret this," he bellowed, lunging toward her. Just as the confrontation seemed destined to escalate further, a man from the crowd stepped forward. His name was Mike, a local gym owner who had been training in martial arts for years. He recognized the brewing conflict and couldn't stand by any longer. "That's enough," he shouted, stepping between Sarah and the man. "Back off, man." Mike's voice was firm, carrying an authority that commanded attention. The presence of another man who was not intimidated by the assailant shifted the dynamic. The crowd began to murmur, the tension thickening as they anticipated the outcome. The man's bravado faltered as he faced not just Sarah, but now Mike, who stood resolutely against him. "Leave her alone," Mike said, his gaze steady. "This isn't your turf anymore." The man hesitated, his bravado cracking under the weight of the unified presence around them. With a final glare at Sarah, he backed away, muttering insults under his breath as he retreated into the crowd. The collective breath of the onlookers seemed to release at once, a wave of relief washing over them. As the adrenaline began to fade, Sarah felt a mix of emotions. She was exhilarated, proud of her courage, but also shaken by the confrontation. Her heart raced, and she could still feel the heat of anger coursing through her veins. The crowd began to disperse, but the sense of solidarity remained. People approached Sarah, offering words of encouragement and support. "You were amazing," one woman exclaimed, tears glistening in her eyes. "You stood up for yourself and for all of us." Amidst the chaos, Miss Clara came over, wrapping her arms around Sarah in a tight embrace. "You're a warrior, my dear. Never forget that." As she stepped back, Sarah looked around at the people who had gathered. Their faces were filled with admiration and pride. This moment had become more than just a personal battle. It was a collective stand against racism and hatred. In the following days, the incident continued to linger in Sarah's mind. She replayed every moment, the fear, the anger, and ultimately, the triumph. The confrontation had sparked something within her, a fierce desire to channel her experience into something greater. Yet, there were also darker shadows lurking. Nightmares invaded her sleep, filled with echoes of the man's taunts and the fear that had gripped her. Each night she closed her eyes. She relived the moment, her heart racing as she braced for another confrontation. Would he come back? Would he retaliate? With the help of her friends and family, Sarah began to confront her fears. She started attending support groups, where she found solace in sharing her story with others who had faced similar experiences. Listening to their narratives helped her heal, and she realized that she was not alone in her fight against prejudice. As she continued to share her experience, she found a sense of purpose. Her story resonated with many, and she began to understand that her fight was part of a larger struggle for justice. Amidst this healing journey, Sarah developed an unexpected friendship with Mike, the man who had intervened during the confrontation. They began meeting regularly to discuss their shared commitment to fighting against racism in their community. Over coffee, they exchanged stories about their lives, their struggles, and their hopes for a more just society. Mike shared his own experiences with racism, how he had witnessed it in his neighborhood, and felt compelled to act. "I've always believed that if we don't stand up, nothing will change," he said, his eyes filled with determination. Sarah felt a sense of camaraderie with him, their shared mission solidifying their bond. They began organizing community events together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the atmosphere in the city shifted dramatically. The confrontation between Sarah and the racist man had not only impacted the individuals involved, but also set the stage for a larger conversation about race, justice, and community. News outlets began to pick up the story, transforming a personal incident into a public spectacle. The media's role in the aftermath was both powerful and complicated, weaving a narrative that resonated across social platforms and sparked widespread discussions. That evening, as the crowd dispersed, a local news reporter named Jason arrived at the park, his camera crew in tow. The buzz of excitement was palpable. Sarah, still trembling from the adrenaline, had not realized how quickly her story would spread. Jason approached her, microphone in hand, eyes wide with the thrill of the unfolding drama. "Can we get a few words, ma'am?" he asked, his tone urgent but respectful. Sarah hesitated, still processing the chaos of moments earlier. But as she looked around, she noticed people watching her intently, some with expressions of admiration, others with skepticism. "Sure," she replied, her voice shaking. The camera focused on her, and she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down. It was as if she had stepped onto a stage, and the audience awaited her performance. Jason asked about her experience, and Sarah recounted the confrontation, her heart racing as she relived every moment. She spoke of the shock, the fear, and ultimately, the empowerment she felt when she stood her ground. Her words were raw and emotional, a powerful testament to resilience. "I just wanted him to know that he can't treat people like that," she said, her eyes blazing with intensity. "I'm not afraid to fight back." As she spoke, Jason nodded, captivated by her bravery. He realized this wasn't just a story about an altercation. It was a chance to highlight a broader issue of racism in their community. But as the interview wrapped up, Sarah sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The moment felt fragile, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her story was becoming something bigger than herself, something that could be manipulated or misunderstood. Within hours, clips of her interview began circulating on social media. The hashtag #FightbackSarah trended as people shared her story, praising her courage and resilience. The narrative quickly evolved. She was no longer just Sarah, but a symbol of strength for countless others who had faced discrimination. As she scrolled through the posts, Sarah felt a strange mix of pride and anxiety. On one hand, she was honored to be a voice for change, but on the other, the weight of the spotlight began to suffocate her. What if people misunderstood her intentions? What if the media twisted her words? A video montage began to emerge, featuring snippets of the confrontation, her interview, and clips of people sharing their own experiences with racism. The video resonated deeply with viewers, prompting emotional reactions from those who identified with her struggle. But in the back of Sarah's mind lingered the question, who was controlling the narrative now? As the story gained traction, it also attracted criticism. Not everyone viewed her actions in a positive light. Online forums exploded with heated debates, and soon enough, negative comments flooded in. Some questioned whether Sarah had escalated the situation unnecessarily, claiming that she was just looking for attention. Others suggested that the media was sensationalizing the issue for clicks and views. Typical, one comment read, "She just wanted her 5 minutes of fame." Each criticism stung like a bee. Sarah found herself losing sleep over the harsh words, feeling the weight of the world's scrutiny bearing down on her. The very platform that had given her a voice now felt like a double-edged sword. In contrast, many stood firmly in her corner. Supporters flooded social media with messages of encouragement, praising her for standing up against racism. They shared their own stories, echoing sentiments of solidarity and unity. It was a roller coaster of emotions, and Sarah felt like she was riding it blindfolded, unsure of where it would take her next. In the days that followed, community leaders began to take notice. The local activist group reached out to Sarah, eager to discuss how her story could catalyze meaningful change. They invited her to participate in community forums, panel discussions, and even local radio shows. Suddenly, her life took on a new rhythm, one filled with purpose but also fraught with anxiety. "Your story has the power to inspire others," one of the activists told her during a meeting. "We want to help you amplify your voice." Sarah was torn. She wanted to make a difference, but the pressure felt immense. Each invitation to speak felt like a double-edged sword. Could she bear the weight of so many expectations? The excitement of potentially being a change-maker clashed with her fear of public speaking and the scrutiny that came with it. In a quiet corner of Maplewood, a small town where everyone knew everyone else, life moved slowly, punctuated only by the laughter of children and the occasional bark of a dog. But on that fateful Saturday morning, everything changed. The sun was just rising, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, but the atmosphere was heavy with an unspoken tension. Sarah, a young woman known for her kindness and strength, prepared to attend a community picnic at the park. She had always loved the gatherings. They were a chance to catch up with friends, enjoy good food, and share laughter. Little did she know that this particular day would set off a chain of events that would alter the very fabric of her life and the lives of those around her. The park was alive with color as families set up picnic tables, laying out blankets and food. The smell of barbecues filled the air, mingling with the sweet scent of blooming flowers. Children ran around, their laughter echoing against the trees, while adults chatted animatedly, catching up on each other's lives. Sarah arrived, her heart light with excitement, eager to embrace the warmth of community. As she moved through the crowd, greeting familiar faces and sharing hugs, she felt a sense of belonging that had always comforted her. She joined her friends, Sarah and Mike, who had been there early to grab the best spot under a large oak tree. They laughed and joked, sharing stories and teasing each other as they munched on hot dogs and homemade potato salad. But as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the grass, a storm was brewing on the outskirts of the park, unnoticed by the happy gathering. Just as laughter echoed in the air, a figure appeared at the edge of the park, a man with an intimidating presence. He wore a leather jacket, and his expression was one of contempt as he approached the festivities. His name was Tom, known in town for his fiery temper and harsh words. He often voiced strong opinions, especially when it came to race, and it was clear that he had a chip on his shoulder. Tom sauntered into the park, his eyes scanning the crowd. It was as if he was a storm cloud moving through a sunny day, and Sarah sensed the shift in the air. Conversations paused, laughter faltered, and a hushed murmur swept through the crowd. The atmosphere thickened as he drew closer, a wave of unease rippling through the park. As Sarah looked around, she could see the expressions of her friends change. Some wore looks of concern, while others exchanged anxious glances. It was an unspoken agreement. They all felt the tension rising like the humidity before a thunderstorm. Tom's eyes landed on a group of friends, one of whom was Marcus, a young black man who had grown up in Maplewood. Marcus was friendly and well-loved, known for his infectious smile and kind heart. But to Tom, he was nothing more than an enemy, a scapegoat for his own insecurities. "What are you doing here?" Tom sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The laughter around the park faded, replaced by a heavy silence. Sarah's heart raced as she recognized the moment unfolding before her. Marcus looked taken aback, his face registering shock and disbelief. "I'm just enjoying the picnic, man. What's the problem?" But Tom was unyielding. "This is a white neighborhood. You don't belong here," he spat, his words dripping with venom. Gasps filled the air, and Sarah could feel the tension escalate. It was as if time had frozen, and everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Sarah felt a surge of anger rising within her. How could someone be so cruel, so ignorant? She glanced at Marcus, who stood his ground, refusing to back down. It was a moment of bravery, but Sarah could see the pain in his eyes. "Tom, stop," she shouted, stepping forward. The crowd shifted, murmurs of surprise and fear rippling through them. "This isn't okay. You can't talk to him like that." Tom turned his attention to her, his face twisting into a scowl. "And who are you to tell me what's okay?" "I'm someone who believes in equality and respect," Sarah replied, her voice firm but shaking slightly. "You need to leave him alone." As the words left her mouth, a wave of adrenaline surged through her. The park was silent, all eyes fixed on the confrontation. Sarah's heart raced, pounding in her chest like a drum. The moment hung in the air, heavy with tension. Tom took a step closer, his anger boiling over. "You think you can just stand up for him? You don't know what you're talking about. You're just a naive little girl." His words were a blade, cutting through the air, aimed directly at Sarah. But in that moment, something shifted within her. The fear that had once held her back transformed into a fierce determination. "I may be naive, but I know right from wrong," she retorted, her voice growing stronger. "What you're doing is wrong, and it needs to stop." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, a wave of support for Sarah and Marcus. Tom's face twisted with rage as he realized that he was losing control of the situation. "Back off, all of you," he shouted, trying to regain his dominance. But the community had united in this moment, a collective stand against his hatred.